So this is Unit 3, Module 3, Lesson 2. So a lot of this we've talked about, but we're going to add in a little bit more theory behind this as we go through. So I'm going to be throwing out some vocabulary words. So I ask that you pay careful attention, maybe toss the vocabulary words into the word cloud as we go through. So we've talked about strings, we've talked about the string, we talked about the arrays. Now we're going to talk about how to access the string methods in the arrays. It's kind of putting the ideas together. So if we take a look at the following, we have a different way of setting up arrays than we did yesterday. In this case, we have a string. It's called movies. We have the bracket to let Java know that it is an array. And then we're going to populate the array immediately using the set notation here, where we have the curly cube brackets, and then we put in our list of movies. Java will, when it first constructs this array, will count the number of items here as part of the initial construction. Notice we don't need the new word. This is a special type of constructor for string arrays and for different arrays, any value you want to put in there actually, where you use the curly cues, and since you're doing it this way and you're populating it immediately, you don't need the new word. Partially because it's not actually entirely using the constructor the way it normally does. You're giving the information in a different way. So it's populating it right away. Again, this is because of the way they wrote Java. Not to make it easier to understand, to make it easier to use. So this is one of those things, it's not consistent with the way they do everything else, the way they construct objects. So you kind of have to get used to some of those nuances in Java, that there are things that are put in there that are just purely functional. It is easier to fill an array right away than it is to set up an array, dimension it, run through a loop to put in an item each and every single entry. It's just easier to do it this way. So that's why that's in there. Then we have a little for loop here where we're going to movies.length. Now remember from yesterday and last session that .length, because it's missing the parentheses, is a property. It's a vocabulary word. It's a property. It's a piece of data that is telling us how many items are in the array. That gets set up when the array is constructed. Again, another vocabulary word. Constructor, constructed. We're going to print out movies I, which is getting each value of the array at index I as the for loop goes from 0 to the length of the movies. And of course, it prints it out because it's a print line, everything on each individual line. So this is pretty much what we did yesterday. So again, to point out, these two things are very different. Movies I.length with parentheses is accessing and calculating the memory, the length of the string. So it's actually doing something. Whereas the data for the length of the array is stored here as a property. There's no parentheses. Properties and data are not methods. Methods always come with some type of parentheses. Even if there's not a set of parameters that go in those parentheses, it at the very least has the parentheses. So if we look at this code here we're printing again, our for loop, where we're using movies.length. Here we're printing the name of the movie, and here we're printing the length of the string that is stored at that location. So we are accessing the length of the string that is stored at each individual index. So you first list the larger container. The larger container is the array. Movies. Then we put a dot, and we list the method that we're trying to access at index I, the particular block of the array that we're interested in. Now, the reason it's important that we think about it this way, when we start talking about two-dimensional arrays, it's a larger container that contains objects. Those objects are arrays rather than being strings. It's arrays of arrays. And you would access the information the same way. So if you wanted to find the length of the second array that's stored, you would use the name of the array, I.length. In that case, it wouldn't have parentheses. And we'll look at that when we look at two-dimensional arrays because it's a little tricky as to how that works. But we have to be very careful and make sure we identify. We don't have parentheses. It's a piece of data. It's a property. If we have parentheses, it's a method. So what I'd like you to do is take the code from yesterday, or there's a startup file for today. Use the character at method to show the first character of each string instead of its length. So I'm going to pause the video, and I want you to just work on that. There's no you try in the lesson. Just work on that, and then restart the video. So this is the code we're working from. So if you completed it, it looks something like this. We changed the length of character at 0, character at I, whatever. Some method call to character at that determines the character of the value that's stored at the string in the array at index, wherever we're at, index I. So it should look like that. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is modify the code to show the last letter of each individual string. Now you got to be careful because each individual string has a different length. So you have to think about how you're going to access that. How are you going to access the length of the string with the method? And part of the reason why I'm using the word access is because that's actually a vocabulary word. It's called an accessor. We're accessing some information about the string. So it's an accessor. That's another vocabulary word, accessor. So go ahead, give that a try. See if you can change your code so you find the last letter. So it looks a little convoluted, but in here, the first part of this is accessing the method character at for the string located in the array movies at index I. To get the character we're interested in, which is namely the last character, we have to again access the string and use the length method. So we're going to call the array that is containing the string at index I and using that string's dot length method. If you need to, pause this video, take a look at this, make sure this makes sense in your head before you go any further. You'll notice as part of Java, the period becomes very important. The period really gives you that distinction between object and method. And furthermore, we can actually level this and nest this at several points. Each period has an important meaning. So punctuation, so to speak, becomes very important in Java. We have our periods, we have our semicolons, we have our brackets. Just like when you're talking in English, punctuation is important in order to understand what somebody's saying and understand the communication there. It's also important inside of this that you include all the different punctuation correctly. I didn't assign a practice for this, so this is really just the lesson, because we're going to do a lot of practice with this as we go through, but I wanted to kind of pull together some of the ideas we've been dealing with. But that does put us at the end of Module 3, so to speak. I'm going to open this so you can see it. So you're not going to be able to answer every piece of this. But what I'd like you to do is to take a look at this problem here in Lesson 3. This could very well be a part of a free response question on the AP test. So yes, I know it's the next lesson, but it's just a practice problem by itself. And I'm not going to grade you on this because I want you to just have the experience of going through and practice it. This is the first time that you've really looked at an AP free response question. So I'd like you to take a look at this question and spend some time trying to solve it. And that's what I'd like to do for the next 15 minutes or so, us to go through and try to solve this question. Okay, so work on that, and we'll see you when we start talking about the module quiz for this module and the module assignment.